Well, as predicted, all four managed to get the job done against Eddie Hall. Didn't have it all his own way, obviously, did he? They got a knockdown against him. The ropes kept him up, rightly called a knockdown. But once he'd settled in, he was just too good for old Eddie, weren't he? Too good for Eddie Hall. Just too big. Too well schooled, too experienced in the boxing ring for Eddie. Eddie just seemed to have the idea that, don't know why he had this idea, but he seemed to have the idea that I'm harder than this guy, I think I'm tougher than him, so that means I'm definitely going to beat him in a boxing match no matter what I do, which is obviously ridiculous, and obviously didn't come to fruition, did he? Because he was comfortably beaten for my money. I don't think he won a round other than the round where he knocked him down, maybe the first round, I don't know, but cuts above both eyes. The difference here is, like we did in the breakdown video, Thor so much bigger in terms of height and reach. Okay, he had less weight behind him, but again, still a massively heavy guy, still an incredibly, even for a heavyweight, still like incredibly heavyweight. So I don't think Eddie Hall's weight helped him, the additional weight. Like I say, he was already undersized compared to Thor. The methods of his training, like we did on the breakdown videos, when he was even doing the pads, never even put his hands up. I know I've heard other people saying this as well now, but he did that in the fight as well, barely put his hands up. I don't know what the strategy was. I mean, he was coming out as a southpaw as well, and then switching, he was trying to switch it, but neither of them used an uppercut. Eddie was just constantly looking for mainly the overhand right or the overhand left, depending on which stance he decided to stand in, but mainly the overhand right, and there was just no cuteness about it at all. It was a bit weird to watch. I mean, he took to sort of leaning over. I mean, he's already massively the smaller guy anyway, but he took to sort of leaning over to the side, making himself even smaller, and was a ridiculous position to put himself in anyway, because if he was to be hit there, there wasn't anywhere to go apart from to the floor, even if it wasn't a powerful shot. It was just a ridiculous sort of pose. I mean, he was doing it for several seconds, and obviously when you're watching it live, it felt like a lot longer than several seconds, sort of leaning to the side in a weird stance. But I was quite impressed with Eddie's footwork. I mean, it wasn't exactly perfect, I didn't expect it to be perfect, but for such a heavy guy, and a guy who's never really had a boxing match before, his feet looked quite swift, obviously swifter in the earlier rounds than the later rounds, naturally, as he tires, even though it was only 6 rounds. 6 3-minute rounds, so I was led to believe it was 2-minute rounds, but obviously 3-minute rounds, which, made for a better spectacle, I feel. But yeah, they both began to tire at the end, but Eddie in particular, as we expected, as the older man and the heavier man and the less experienced man in the ring. The difference is, to me here, really, obviously, like we say, you've got the problems, you've got the natural disadvantages with the size in favour of Thor and the age in favour of Thor. But the training methods, we were saying, Thor has done this correctly, and it's proven to be correct because he won relatively convincingly for my money. It wasn't dubious, he won. Nobody's saying nobody said he shouldn't have won. He did, he won. But the way he went about his training, like we said in the other video, he took himself right back to basics. He's entering a new sport, accepts that he doesn't know anything about this sport. Might be an incredibly strong and incredibly big man, but accepted early on that he knew nothing about this sport, and he needs to start from the very beginning. He needs to be humble, and that's what he did. And he took himself off and learnt how to box, and he found himself a legitimate boxing trainer in Billy Nelson. Now, I'm not saying Eddie's trainer isn't a legitimate trainer, but I mean, I didn't even know who he was until the Eddie Hall Association. I'm still not incredibly familiar with who he is now. He's a guy called Lyndon by all accounts, but no disrespect to the guy, he just didn't seem to know what he was doing. I mean, like I say, in all the training videos we saw, all we saw was Eddie hitting pads, and yeah, the footwork was never great, and the hands were never up, or there was never any uppercuts, there was never any proper combinations of more than 2 punches. The pad work was pretty bad, and as a trainer you should obviously be correcting that, because even though pads don't hit back necessarily, it's, you never want to get into a habit of getting into bad habits. But he never corrected him, and like I say, he's not a famous coach, which doesn't mean you're a bad coach, but perhaps he's not had any notable sort of success stories with fighters for a reason. Again, not trying to slate the guy, I don't know him, but what I do know is, in one of the rounds, I heard the clapper for the last 10 seconds, and he was standing up on the ring apron trying to come into the ring. The referee told him to get out, which, under some rules would have been a disqualification for his man, but obviously this wasn't really wasn't sanctioned by any of the legitimate governing bodies. He didn't know he didn't know the difference between the bell for the end of the round and the clapper for the last 10 seconds of the round. He was climbing in, he was ready to get in. He was halfway in the ring until the referee. He would have got in if the referee hadn't stopped him at the sound of the clapper. So that to me isn't a very experienced man. Didn't say anything at any of the press conferences. Again, lack of experience, I suppose. There didn't seem to be any sort of game plan implemented. Eddie got cut over both eyes. There was no cut, man. when he finally managed to get in the ring, when the bell actually went, Lyndon, Eddie's trainer, he was acting as cut man as well. So there was no cut man, evidently. What the bell sounded like, didn't know the difference between a bell and the clapper. And the game plan was just all over the place. And from what I could see, the training was all over the place as well. So he hasn't done anything to endear himself to me. On the other hand, you've got Thor with Billy Nelson. Nelson was piping up at the press conference. Okay, not the world's best speaker, but he was actually standing up for his man and getting a bit of. He's an experienced guy, getting a bit of hype going and trying to build his man's confidence and trying to take away somewhat confidence of Eddie Hall even at the press conference. Then his man Thor was obviously more well schooled. He actually had his hands up. He was actually moving around. He was actually looking for more punches other than his overhand right or his overhand left being a southpaw. Again, still not massive variation. There wasn't massive combination. There was hardly any uppercuts or anything. There was very few body shots. Not perfect, far from it, but considerably better than Eddie's, and hence why Thor won and Eddie didn't. Like I say, the whole thing with Hall just seemed to be like, I'll train hard, I'll work hard, I'll get a good sweat on. I'm harder than you, so I'm just gonna, I'll work hard and turn up and win. The fact that you've got a better trainer, it doesn't matter the fact that you're doing better training for a boxing match. He seemed to just think it was. I don't know, if he'd have wanted a street fight, then maybe he should have gone for the bare knuckle, which still isn't a street fight, obviously, but it's slightly more rough and ready than a regulated Queensberry Rules boxing match, or maybe even MMA. You know what I mean? If that's what he wanted, again, it's still regulated to a certain extent, but less than Queensberry Rules boxing. But my money would have still been on Thor on any of them anyway, because I just think his whole attitude was better. He'd just have a better approach to it, and hence why he's been a more successful strongman than Eddie overall. It pains me to say it really, because I didn't dislike Eddie Hall. I don't dislike him now. He's not my favourite, like we said in the last video, but he's the English man. The long and the short of it is, Thor is a more successful boxer. He actually had boxing matches, and for Eddie to go on and say that he was beating up pros, he ain't beating up any pros with that style. Granted, he can punch hard, but what man of 25 stone, whatever he is, who's been world's strongest man, who has trained boxing for 2 years allegedly? There'd be a problem if you couldn't punch hard, you know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, apparently there could be a rematch. I still, if there was to be a rematch, I still fancy Thor. With Thor being the younger man and seemingly having the better attitude when it comes to these things, I think he can improve again. I think Eddie can certainly improve, even though he's an older man. Just in the attitude, if nothing else. Get himself a trainer who's not a yes man. Get himself somebody who's not just happy to be associated with a big name, even if he isn't a boxer. Billy Nelson wasn't bothered. By his own admission, he'd never even heard of the either of the two guys before Thor came to him to train him. And he's had, he's got heavyweight, world ranked heavyweights in his gym now. He's got Martin Bakoli. I mean, he's had world champions. He's had Ricky Burns. He's had, among others, I think he's probably had Alex Arthur as well. And he's had various high-profile fighters in his gym, if not, even being directly trained by him. So he's seen it all before. But Eddie Hall, it just seemed to be a bit of a yes man. We're doing this today. Just frightened to tell him that he's doing anything wrong, frightened to correct him on anything. Just very glad of the association and maybe the money and the exposure that he's getting. Which isn't, it's all well and good for him. Maybe he's getting paid and maybe he's getting a bit of exposure. But for me, he's not getting the right type of exposure because it wasn't a success, was it? But yeah, he needs somebody who isn't a yes man. He needs somebody who's going to do proper training with him. Somebody who isn't frightened to tell him no. Somebody who, he's going to tell him how it is. Isn't going to kiss his arse, for want of a better phrase. If there was to be a rematch, I fancy it to be closer, perhaps. But I still think Thor, he's just at such a massive advantage to begin with. Like we said, he's younger, he's taller, he's got a longer reach. He's been doing boxing in terms of the proper training for, I'm going to go as far as saying, almost 2 years longer than Eddie. Obviously, when you're younger, you learn stuff quicker. There's only a year in it or so, but you'd rather be a year younger than you are, wouldn't you? It's always going to be an advantage. But if there is a rematch, I still fancy Thor. Perhaps not quite as emphatically, but I still fancy Thor. They're also on about who these guys could fight next. I know certainly Thor's on about staying in the boxing game. And they're on about he might fight Martin Ford. This Martin Ford's got to beat the Iranian Hulk when they're fighting, which is coming up. My money, and I did a video on this, yep, he'll beat him. Even though, I mean, it's a bit of a, I feel like a bit of a knob giving a prediction on that because I've never seen either of them fighting. I've never seen anything of the Iranian Hulk really, in terms of anything, not even punching. He's never had a fight to my knowledge. I haven't even really seen any training footage. I've seen a fair bit of training footage of Martin Ford, and he looks decent for a big fella. But he's I think he's 40 years old. He's about to turn 40 shortly. So, you know, he's no spring chicken. But he's the massively bigger guy in that fight. Looks a lot fitter and looks to be quite handy on the pads. So, yeah, my money would be on him. But like I say, it's difficult to put money on anybody with any certainty, any conviction when you've not seen the other guy, or even training, let alone fighting. But the winner of that, the Iranian Hulk, Martin Ford, I predict would be Martin Ford. And perhaps there could be Hap 4 versus Martin Ford would be a fight in the future. Similar sizes, about 6'9" or whatever they are. So yeah, it's and I would imagine similar weights. If I don't have all the weights to hand, and I mean obviously Ford has been right up there in weight in the past. He's been over 450 pounds by all accounts. Wasn't anything like this in the Eddie fight. Wouldn't be anything like that in any future fights. Probably never going to be anywhere up near that weight again, I wouldn't imagine. But yeah, again, with Ford being more of a proven entity in the boxing ring, with him being so much younger than Martin Ford, and with the Martin Ford not having any physical advantage in terms of, well, let's be honest, he ain't stronger than Ford physically, is he? Not that that necessarily matters. You'd rather be stronger, but it's by no means a given that you'd win the fight because you're stronger. But he's not going to be bigger than anybody. I mean, I don't have the exact dimensions in front of me, but Ford's at least the same size as this guy, if not bigger. He's certainly younger. He's certainly more experienced in boxing. So yeah, my money would be on Ford if that fight happens. If the Iranian Hulk wins, perhaps Iranian Hulk would fight Ford. But again, I don't see him winning against Martin Ford, the Iranian Hulk. And even if he did, I don't see him fighting Ford. And even if he did fight Ford, I think Ford would win, obviously. I think that just the genetics would be too, and the experience. Far too big, far too strong, far too tall, reach, boxing experience. I'd fancy Ford. Also talking about Mariusz Pudzianowski, who's, I believe, in his 40s, if not in getting on his 50s now. Ex-world strongest man of several times, but that was going back many years. Moved into MMA. He's never had a boxing match before. Obviously, boxing, and he's done kickboxing as well. He's obviously a part of that to a certain extent. So, you know, more experienced than Eddie, but then again, he's smaller than Eddie, I believe. I don't think he's over 6'3". Pudzianowski might even only be 6'2", something like that. So, again, there'd be no physical advantage for Pudzianowski against Thor. I would fancy Thor again, just in terms of his sheer size and youth, because that's a big difference. I mean, you know, like I say, Hall's 1 year older than Thor, which is an advantage for Thor, but it's not much, is it? I mean, there's not much to speak of, but Pudzianowski must be at least 10, if not 15 years older than Thor. Now that is a big advantage when Thor's already in his mid-30s. And again, the size and the boxing experience, my money would be on Thor. They're the three possibilities for Thor next, as I see them. Either Eddie Hall rematch, which, to be honest, I don't particularly want to see. I think Thor would win that again, like I said. I think it'd probably be a bit closer if Eddie a bit of humble pie with his training methods and his mentality. But yeah, that's a possible fight, the rematch. But I see Thor winning that again. Another possibility would be the Martin Ford Hulk winner, Iranian Hulk, which I see as being Martin Ford most likely. But again, if that was to happen, I'd see Thor winning that. Difficult to give specific prediction because we've never seen Martin Ford fight. We don't even know for a fact he's going to beat the Iranian Hulk. I predict that he will, but again, difficult to predict when you haven't seen any real footage of either of them. But yeah, that's a possibility, Martin Ford. But again, I would fancy Ford against the Iranian Hulk or Martin Ford. And the other one, Pudzianowski, another former strongman, fighter. A lot more experienced in fighting than Ford, but not necessarily more experienced in boxing specifically. But again, I'd fancy Ford due to the size and the age difference, and the fact that he's had actual boxing matches rather than just kickboxing on MMA matches that Pudzianowski's had. He's had a good number of them by all accounts, but yeah, none of them have been specifically boxing. So it's time for Eddie to eat a bit of humble pie, because you see him on all his YouTube stuff, you know, and all the way that he were carrying on in front of his son and that at the press conference. I mean, yeah, you don't usually do that. I mean, you wouldn't want to be squaring up with your son in the middle, squaring up to somebody who you hate and they hate you, when your son's sat right in the middle of you. It's just not responsible, is it? You know what I mean? It's just not what you do. Besides the way that you were talking to each other as well. Never a good idea, that. Also, if you watch Eddie Hall's videos before they did the gloves are off or whatever the equivalent was with Coogan, Eddie was wiping his arse on Thor's seat that he hadn't arrived yet. He was about to come and sit down before he entered the room, and he'd gone and dropped his keks and started wiping his arse all over his seat. And then he showed him the video afterwards. Probably wishes. Well, I'm damn sure he wishes he didn't do that now, because he just looks more of a cunt than he. Let's be honest. It hasn't come out well for Eddie, has he? He hasn't made a YouTube video since, to my knowledge. I haven't really heard much from him at all. But, you know, he was damn sure of what he was going to do. Just seemed to be based on purely on the fact that he thought I'm harder than you, you know. He was damn sure that he was definitely going to win, impressively, because I'm harder than you. Well, you might be harder than him. You didn't necessarily show that on Saturday, but maybe you are. But you certainly ain't a better boxer than him, are you? You certainly haven't gone about this whole thing well. You certainly haven't gone about it as well as Thor has. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I know you're never going to see a technical sort of. You're never going to see anything incredibly technical, and you don't always want to see incredibly technical boxing, because that's not always the most entertaining, is it? Doesn't really go wrong here with two heavyweights that hate each other, and obviously both world's strongest men in the past. So there's obviously power. It was always going to, even if it was technically, it surprised me how good it was, particularly Thor, in terms of his technique. Like I say, far from perfect, but it was good, better than I thought. But, you know, you're always going to be on edge anyway, because of the way that they are, and how much they hate each other, and how big they are, and how strong they are, with being heavyweights. Yeah, that just keeps you on your edge anyway, rather than being in awe of the skill, because there wasn't much more skill than I thought, but, you know, the skill in there wasn't, you know, you weren't going to be in awe of it. Anyway, my prediction came true yet again.